I don't think education should be the lead. I think lifestyle and emotions and
Yeah.
occasion should be the lead. And I think education is what comes maybe secondarily, or even I would say third of all,
Hmm.
which would in the middle, you talk about your story and what makes you unique as a brand. And then you can like layer in some education, but it should never be that top of funnel approach, should be education. And I do think it needs to be more of a conversation and less of a lecture, as much as possible. Obviously, it's hard when it comes to marketing. You can't, but I think like creating more approachable language and really thinking about the consumer who has no kind of idea, no concept. Like even our tasting notes, I think are a little bit too ridiculous.
What do you mean? Will you expound?
Welcome to Masterclass US Wine Market with me, Barbara Fitzgerald. In this show, we'll break down the complexities of selling wine in the US by discussing the relevant issues of today with experts from around the globe. Each episode serves up 3 key insights to help elevate your winery's presence in the US market. So grab a pen and paper and let's pave the way for your success in the US.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Masterclass US Wine Market. Today, I am really excited to be talking to Molly Bossardt. Molly is the founder of Bread and Butter Digital Marketing and a wine marketing strategist who helps wineries build stronger brands, create consumer demand, and grow direct-to-consumer sales. She's originally from the US, but now based in Torino, Italy, and she brings more than a decade of experience in wine and marketing. So, Molly, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Before we dive into our talk all about marketing, branding, et cetera today, can you tell us a little bit more about your background, Molly, and how you came to work in the wine business?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as you know, as your intro mentioned, I've been working in marketing for over a decade. And prior to that, I have a master's from Sotheby's Institute of Art, where I studied marketing and branding, mostly focused in on the art world and luxury world. We also did touch a lot on wine too. And right before I went to grad school, I actually had this like gap year, in which I moved home to Virginia and I worked at a winery, and it was the best job I've ever had. I worked in a tasting room, and it was like as I was doing that, I was studying for, I was basically preparing for grad school, right? That was a while ago though. That was like over 10 years. Well, it was, yeah, probably 12 years ago, 13 years ago, which is crazy. Time flies. So that was my first time working in the wine industry, was really on the ground level in tasting rooms. And it's funny, I don't really talk about that quite as much, but I always loved the environment. Again, it was the most fun job to make people happy, pouring them wine and really like connecting with them on about wine and Virginia wine, and especially back then, Virginia wine was kind of still very up and coming. So I think there was a lot of like education that we leaned into, in a fun way, not in a hitting them over the head kind of way. And then, yeah, so I started my own business in 2020, and about 2 years into my business, I decided to specifically focus on wineries because, again, I was living back in Virginia after 10 years in New York, and I just noticed that there's so many wineries that really need some support with their direct-to-consumer marketing and with just marketing in general.
Yeah, amazing. It's so fun to have that kind of ground level experience because that is where you talk to the people that eventually you're planning to serve now with your marketing business, right? So you get this kind of like hands on psychographic insight into the very people that you're targeting.
Exactly. And I think it's like one thing that, maybe a lot of people overlook. And one thing that I do with clients when I start working with them is I mine those customer reviews. I look at how customers are speaking about their wine and try to use that language in marketing. I mean, this is just like one key thing that I do among
Yeah,
other things with strategy and messaging.
I love that. Well, as you mentioned, you kind of work at the intersection of consumer psychology and brand strategy for these DTC sales, helping wineries not just understand how people buy wine today, but also why. So, with that in mind, our 3 key takeaways for this episode and what we're excited to learn from you, Molly, are number one, wine doesn't necessarily have a consumer problem, but more of a positioning problem. So we'll kind of move beyond the overused statement, Gen Z is drinking less, and unpack how identity, aspiration, convenience, and emotional relevance are kind of replacing traditional messaging. Number two, the wine industry spends a lot of time explaining wine, but maybe not enough time making people want it. So we'll look at what it looks like to sell identity first and expertise second, which is something I learned from you, Molly. And then number three, the future of wine belongs to brands that are creating occasions. So this is a lot more than marketing tactics. And we'll look at how successful brands are creating rituals and moments that people want to participate in.
Awesome.
So yeah, let's jump into it. I'm so excited.
Yeah, me too. I mean, there's so much right there that I could like latch onto and kind of talk about. And
so our first takeaway is, where are we getting positioning wrong? So I mentioned, everyone kind of says, oh, younger consumers aren't drinking wine. They're not interested in wine. Does your experience tell you that this is true?
I think it's a bit more complicated than that. So I think that, first of all, who is a younger consumer? I think that that's something that we haven't fully defined, and we have kind of forgotten that a younger consumer with what has typically been more disposable in a relatively more disposable income than Gen Z is millennials and Gen X. They are also your younger consumer, right? And I think if you look at what motivates those generations, it's very different from what motivates boomers. So this is something that I see that's very, very relevant to most wineries that I work with. Most wineries, their direct-to-consumer revenue is being driven by wine club and tasting room sales, right? So that's bulk of what how they're making their money on the D2C side. And if you look at wine club, a lot of wine club is obviously going to be boomers. They tend to be older consumers, right?
Right.
And looking at what motivates boomers, right? They typically are motivated by discounts. They're very interested in getting something at a discounted rate. If you look at the motivations of younger consumers, more millennial, I would say, and Gen Z, their motivations are much more about unique experiences, right? Something that is like very different and exciting for them to participate in, and community. And so I think that these are things that the wine industry just has not majority. And of course there are outliers who are doing really cool things and also switching the language to more subscription based, which I think younger consumers feel more comfortable with, even that language being a subscription. But in general, when you look at wine industry, where I think there needs to be some evolution, it's with our messaging around wine club and what you're actually offering in the wine club, because just a straight discount isn't going to do it for majority of young consumers.
Yeah. Let's kind of take it back even to first principles in case someone doesn't know, especially with, language barriers for international folks. But what is the difference between a wine club versus a subscription model?
So I think that's a great question. It's really, I think it's like you determine what it is, right? You can call it a subscription. I think a subscription implies that there's more flexibility. So wine club implies something a little bit. I also think if you look at just the language and the words, and again, I'm a messaging person, so subscription feels modern. It feels like something that people are already doing. I mean, I have 1,000 subscriptions. I mean, I'm subscribed to Spotify. I'm subscribed to, all my like Netflix and HBO and all of these things. It's a little bit more flexible. You can cancel at any time for those mostly. You can, I think like also choose different types of wine, for example, in a lot of these subscriptions, right? So just the language, I think, is what people feel a little bit more comfortable with. Even if you look at like how the wine industry can appeal to a younger consumer, like the language itself is something that's interesting. Like wine club feels like something that my parents would be part of,
Mm-hmm.
and generally that is what it is, So, and yes, wine clubs, like they tend to be a little bit more serious, a little bit more like, you can see, okay, you're going to get your quarterly shipment. It's going to be this. And, you come in and you get your discounted tasting. And I mean, it's pretty much what everybody else is doing, and in fact, I do think like one thing that the wine industry is one criticism I have of the wine industry is that it seems to be people just copy what everybody else is doing and just make it. And there's this like they're not evolving beyond what's always been done and how and looking even to the point where it's like a mentality of I don't want to try something new because my competitor isn't trying that, which is crazy to me because obviously trying something new, yes, there's risks involved, but it's going to differentiate you. And as you know, and I'm sorry, I'm talking a lot and throwing a lot of points out there, but one of the biggest problems with the wine industry right now is that there is a lot of competition. There's a lot of wineries, and there's more and more being. I look at Virginia, Virginia's a new wine region. It's not really a new wine region anymore. And there's new wineries popping up every summer. So you just keep adding more and more competition. You're going to have to really be clear on your differentiators, excuse me.
Yeah, definitely. I want to come back to that point in just a moment, but when you're talking about like what is the difference between subscription and wine club, I wonder, especially thinking in this DTC mindset, if also a wine club kind of the language gets geared a little bit more towards people who are close by, who can come to the winery maybe with regularity, which is great. We want to be that kind of community center, but it limits your reach, right? So and a subscription seems to maybe be thinking a little bit more about somebody anywhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think like again with the subscription model, you can skip shipments. Like there's this more implied and actual flexibility, which I think for a younger consumer, which is hesitant toward commitment, and this is another thing like about millennials and Gen Z, there is this fear of committing to certain things and having a million subscriptions, right? Because we do already have so many. So I think just giving them that flexibility and a lower barrier to entry would be very helpful.
Yeah. So going back to that point you were mentioning earlier about the need to be able to have kind of different conversations with different audiences for a single brand, can you think of a particular brand, maybe it's inside the wine industry, maybe it's outside the wine industry, that is doing this very well, that is meeting kind of multiple consumer demographics efficiently at the same time?
Yeah, I think Tablas Creek is a really good example. I don't have so much insight into their, like behind the scenes, but I know that they have a subscription model. I know that they have like, in fact, they're doing something that I think is really, really cool. They announced it a while ago. It's more or less like a collective. So where your wine club, if you're traveling across, if you're in Virginia, you can go to your reciprocal winery, right? If you're a Tablas Creek member, you're able to go to I think it's Blenheim Vineyards in Virginia, and it's all over the U.S. So I think that collaboration is amazing, and it gives people what they want in wine, which is to explore. So I think Tablas Creek has like learned how to honor what they're really good at. And stay original and rooted to the land and to the Rhone Valley varietals that they're making, but then also bring in these like modern ways of marketing. So I think they're just a prime example of doing, and they make amazing wine. I love their wine.
Yes.
So.
Yes. I'm a big fan too. They do some amazing things over there.
Right? Yeah.
Well, let's kind of shift towards the second takeaway that we mentioned, which is really kind of building demand generation. So I saw a piece that you wrote where you were talking about specialty coffee and how it succeeded without needing to necessarily simplify the product. So what did the coffee industry get right? And maybe what can wine learn from them?
Yeah, I mean, I think with coffee though, I think that you don't really lead you lead with the finished product, not necessarily with how you're making the product and everything behind the science of that product. And what I see a lot with wineries is with they're they're leading with things that are not emotional. And this is kind of to our last point, right? Like how do you get to the emotionality of making a decision? They're leading with accolades, so awards, which I think is a decent differentiator occasionally, but it shouldn't be the first thing that you're speaking about when you're talking about your wine. They're leading with their winemaking process, which is going to go over the head of majority of consumers and quite frankly is boring. Because, it might be amazing and differentiated, but I don't think people really care. They want to enjoy, they want to taste something delicious. They want to know your story too. Like, why did you start a winery? What's unique about, it depends. Obviously, some brands are bigger and you don't really have that personal story. But yeah, I think one thing that coffee does is it taps into like an identity without pounding someone over the head with their, very specific, I don't know, like scientific things that are going into everything about coffee, which is funny. I actually don't know that much about coffee, to be honest. I know a lot about wine. I don't know about like a lot about the process of making coffee, but I drink it every day,
Yeah.
I mean, this is like, I'm actually probably, interestingly enough, I drink coffee every day. The average wine consumer is probably very similar to me. Doesn't know a lot about wine, but they drink it maybe not every day, but like every weekend or often, right? Like this is the difference between coffee. It's like you can consume it literally every day without knowing anything about it. You can know what you like. You can know like the different, types of coffee beans. But I just went to the Lavazza Museum in Torino, which is a very cool experience. So I have recently learned a bit more about coffee. But funny enough, if you look at Lavazza's branding and marketing, now they're not necessarily specialty but their branding and marketing doesn't even have anything to do with coffee generally. It's like very
Lifestyle,
avant-garde.
right?
It's lifestyle, it's Italian, it's art. I mean, honestly, it creates like they've created a brand, right? They've created something that people just like immediately recognize, and obviously they know it with coffee, but anyway, they don't talk about coffee in a lot of their marketing.
Yeah. And I think this is such a great parallel for wineries to pay attention to, because to your point, like coffee is very dependent. The tastes, the flavors, it has terroir. Where it comes from will affect how it tastes, the roast will affect how it tastes, all of these things. But I don't think there's a lot of people who consume coffee who feel like they have to know these things before they enjoy the product. They just enjoy the product. And then if they're interested, the information is out there. Go learn more.
Yeah. And I think the wine industry, like I've wrote a piece a while back that like the wine industry has a snob problem, because I really feel like they essentially, there is this idea that you need to know about wine before you can really enjoy wine and consume wine.
So would you say then, like maybe the focus on education is getting in the way of demand generation, or do we need to incorporate education in different ways?
I don't think education should be the lead. I think lifestyle and emotions and occasion should be the lead. And I think education is what comes maybe secondarily, or even I would say third of all, which would in the middle, you talk about your story and what makes you unique as a brand. And then you can like layer in some education, but it should never be that top of funnel approach. Should be education. And I do think it needs to be more of a conversation and less of a lecture, as much as possible. Obviously it's hard when it comes to marketing. You can't, but I think like creating more approachable language and really thinking about the consumer who has no kind of idea, no concept. Like even our tasting notes, I think are a little bit too ridiculous.
What do you mean? Will you expound?
Yeah, like I think, okay, so red currant. Like when was the last time someone had a red currant? You have to be like a big foodie to be having red currant, right? And that's a very frequent tasting note. And we like have kind of gone to these like, I think even just making it a little bit more grounded in like what average consumers are like eating in their day-to-day life or how they experience their day-to-day life. I think that would be more helpful. Or even describing it in an emotional way instead of like describing a tasting note. Some of my favorite tasting notes are like more maybe romantic or emotional, like tastes like like jumping in the water on like a hot summer day or something like that. I'm not sorry. This is not usually
No. I
this,
think
but
it's interesting because to your point, taste is so subjective. Taste is cultural. Like, yes, like another one that I always say is like a common note is gooseberry. I'm like, I couldn't identify a gooseberry if you had a gun to my head. but like,
Yeah, I
it's
don't
like
know.
such a common tasting note. And so, and I love wine. So
Yeah,
I think that having these, to your point, these more emotional descriptors, I mean, you can still have the tasting, quote unquote, the more literal tasting note, but why not like add on these emotional descriptors that people can really envision themselves being
yeah.
part, having it part of their lives, part of their day, whatever.
Yeah, and I think it makes it a little bit more fun and just like more approachable. And I think that's another thing that the wine industry often struggles with. And I understand there's legacy and I live in Italy. Like it's thousands of years old and the estates here are hundreds of years old and their family. So there's a certain history that I think people kind of want to preserve, but I think we need to modernize a little bit, like modernize language, approachability, and access. Because I also, you look demographically, like the U.S. demographics are shifting very radically, like, and so how do we capture a more diverse generation, right? I think part of that is translating to their language, right? Like being able to do that and not being so stuffy.
Do you think that also, like, the idea of heritage and history being like, a qualifier for what makes wine great matters more to the boomers than the younger generation? It's not to say that Gen Z or millennials don't appreciate heritage, but I wonder if just saying this is 100 years old is enough to make them kind of become brand loyal in the way that maybe, it did for the boomers. I don't know. Are you finding that at all?
Um, I think there's a very different relationship to that. And I don't want to get political, but I think a lot of it is like, if you think about these younger generations, I think they tend to be a little bit less trying to fit into trying to access like the traditional markers of
Mm-hmm.
success and of luxury. I think that it's different. It's changing, it's shifting. So I think that's why you see people caring a little bit less about if it's an older product and yeah, that the history and the legacy behind it. It's complicated and not and like these generations and people are not a monolith. And I feel like, one thing I want to be clear on too with marketing and with wine is that the market is huge and that people can
Yeah.
find their niche, you know?
Yeah, I think you're right. We have to watch out. We have a tendency to talk about boomers, Gen Z, Gen X, millennials as though they are one thing, and they're not. I mean, they absolutely have some behaviors that link them as generations of how people have experienced growing up in the world. But absolutely, like you can't be everything to everyone. You have to kind of fine tune the audience.
That's the surest way to fail, if you ask me, is trying to be everything for everyone. And I truly believe you need to have a strong point of view and a strong brand voice, especially to stand out in this, again, very saturated market where there's tons of competition. And it's not just in the wine industry, there's competition beyond the wine industry. And I know people know this, but you've got the beer, craft beer, you've got canned cocktails, you have THC products, like all of this, and that younger consumer, Gen Z, is really gravitating toward THC products. And even millennial moms, I think there's this whole thing where they're substituting wine for, wine for weed. And it's legal in most places.
Yeah. Well, that's a good segue, acknowledging that, of course, the competition is maybe bigger than it's ever been. And so we talked about in the takeaways at the start, the need for occasion-based marketing. You have to make occasions for loyalty, for enjoyment, for consumption. So what would you say are some occasions that wineries might be overlooking today?
I mean, I know that wine has done a good job of like elevating itself. So people think of wine as something that we'll have for anniversaries or for birthdays or for nice dinners, right? I think the occasion needs to be to celebrate the everyday and to incorporate it into, a ritual of just life, within within your boundaries. you know,
Moderation.
yes, moderation. Thank you. That's the word. I live in Italy now and I
I
don't
know,
speak
I get
Italian,
it.
but I keep forgetting English words. That's a new thing that has happened to me because I'm like
No,
constantly processing in another language. Anyway,
yeah.
thank you for helping me.
Yes.
So I think that's an occasion. I also wrote a piece about like aperitivo culture and how it's so intertwined
Mm,
in the culture here in Europe. And you know, it's a bit different, but I think that even like the idea of playing around with aperitivo, or one thing I've been noticing too, like a lot of wineries are really slow during the week. It's like how can you get maybe open it up to remote workers, bring people over and say we're going to be doing, you know, work remotely, we'll have snacks, we'll do something, and then you get like a glass of wine starting at 4:30 or 5 or whatever. You know what I'm saying?
I
I
love
think
this
there's
idea. Yeah.
yeah. I think there's ways to like use what you already have, but then create more opportunities. Again, that's also like community building. I think if they can lean into creating events people want to come to or like that would naturally fit into their life, like the co-working thing, like aperitivo, maybe even like something for children, right? To bring kids out to the winery and then the parents can relax or something like that. And I know wineries are doing these things here and there and certain wineries are, but I would lean into maybe the more mundane, everyday occasions as something that wine can fit into.
Yeah. I love that idea. I love all of these ways your words were how to fit into their lives because that's
Hmm.
what people are looking for. Like life is so crazy, everyone has so much going on. If there's a lot of hurdles they have to jump, and when we talk about DTC for Italian wineries, I'm sure your experience is the same that, it's a very like come one, come all culture. There's not a lot of like, you can't bring dogs, you can't bring kids, etc. But if we think about who's spending a lot of money on wine right now, at least in terms of US consumers, it's millennials, right? So
Hmm.
you need, like, millennials have kids.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
need to be welcoming to that. I was recently trying to help some friends set up tastings in the Napa Valley for a big anniversary celebration. And I won't name any names, but I was shocked at the number of wineries that told me they don't allow anyone under 21.
Wow.
Yeah, again, like if you consider, okay, now you want these millennials to come spend money, they also have to get a babysitter and they're at like that cost on top of that. I think, yeah, let's make the barriers. How can we turn them into opportunities?
Yeah, I think that's like a cultural thing too, because again, you know, you have this perspective of living in Italy. Like in Italy, kids are everywhere.
Yeah.
They go to the bars, like the restaurants, they're running around where people are consuming alcohol. You know, I think in the US, it's almost like if it's a nice place, kids are not supposed to be there. So how do you, you know, change that perception? I think I worked with a winery that really did position itself as more of a premium brand. And what they started doing was like having, you know, one Saturday a month, they were open to families. And so, like, that's where they started, like, open it up to kids. And so that's like a way to experiment with that again without like pissing off your patrons who are, you know, maybe your wine club members who are older who literally want to go because they don't want to be around children. You know,
Yeah.
there's this balance, but I do think if you know, you can experiment with having like family days, basically. Bring the kids.
Yeah. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Oh, Molly, you have given us so many fantastic pieces of advice, insights. I wish I could keep talking to you for much longer, but we do have to start wrapping it up. So we end our show here by asking our guests three kind of rapid fire questions to just really help our listeners better understand this episode and the US market. So if you can, just please answer in a couple sentences.
Okay, let's try. I'm
All right,
usually
I know
good
it's
at
hard. Anyone that has a connection to Italian culture cannot answer in a couple sentences.
yeah. Or without using my hands, apparently.
Yeah. What is your number one tip for mastering marketing to the US market?
Simplicity. So I think the US market is very different from the Italian market. I think the general US market does not know quite as much. So if you can make it as simple and clear and have a real value proposition and not just family legacy, that would be excellent. I've had this, I'll leave it at that, actually.
Good job. What is something you would have told your younger professional self about working in the wine industry?
I think to not get frustrated with like doing the same things over and over again, because like in that, you're going to be honing your skills, and that's going to make you the expert that you later become, you know?
Yeah, I love that. That's beautiful advice. All right. Number 3, where is your favorite place to drink wine in your hometown?
Yeah, this is hard because I just moved to Torino, and I'm like, if I have to be honest, I'm still trying to find my absolute favorite wine bar. There's so many options, but if you want like an experience where there's tons of options and tons of wine, Signor Vino, they're a chain, but they're good.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's this little tiny wine bar basically in Quadrilatero called Nici, Nichi. It's great. And the wine owner or the shop owner is always there, and she gives you personalized recommendations, which is really fun.
I love it. Great recommendation. I'll look it up next time I'm in Torino.
Yay.
Well, Molly, thank you again so much for joining us today on Masterclass US Wine Market. How can our listeners connect with you?
Yes. So they can visit my website, which is very long, so I'm sorry, but breadandbutterdigitalmarketing.com. I'm sure it's linked everywhere. I'm also relatively active on LinkedIn under my personal profile, so it's just Molly Bossardt. And if they're interested in my life in Italy, they can follow me on Instagram, which is funny because it's like blowing up. It's called Molly B in Italy. So that has a little bit to do with wine, but it's mostly like my life in Italy.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, congratulations on your big move. That's very exciting. And thank you so much for all your wisdom today.
Thank you so much. This was fun.
All right. See you soon. Take care.
Ciao.
Ciao.
And that's a wrap for this episode of Masterclass US Wine Market. Thank you so much for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode and want to stay up to date with the latest industry trends, remember to like, follow, and share our podcast. And if you find value in our conversations, please leave us a review to help others discover the show and grow our community. Stay tuned for new episodes every Monday. Until then, brindiamo il vostro successo.